My name, as it is today, is Mary Rose LaRussa Roush Light. Now, I have always been called Mary, never Rose. I found out when I was 18 years old, and I had to have a birth certificate from Tampa, Florida. And the Tampa, Florida birth certificate came back Rosa LaRussa. There is no Mary in that birth certificate. I found that out when I was 18 years old and went to my dad about it. I said, what is going on here? Why am I called Mary Rose and it's not listed on my birth certificate? He says, because when you were born, your name was Rose. And when you were baptized, we put Mary on there. Then why am I not called Rose Mary rather than Mary Rose? He says, I have no idea. Whenever my mother and my two brothers and myself was on a train, and Mother kept saying, we are going to go see Daddy in Chicago. Now, where was Chicago? We didn't know. We did not know anything except we were on this train and we could see water. We could see lots of trees. We had never seen things like this before. And me and my brothers were with our nose against the window looking as we were going. And we got to Chicago. My dad was there to meet us. And he took us to this little 4-room house. And he said, now in the morning, you have got to start school. I was 7, my brother John was 8, and my little brother was 5. So we went to school the next morning. We did not know what school was. We had gone a little bit in Tampa, Florida, but we really didn't know what to expect. I was going into the 1st grade apparently. And we couldn't understand what all these kids were talking about. We didn't know what they were saying. And they did not know what we were saying. And we started crying. And we went home and we told our parents, we don't know what these kids, what are they saying? And she said, they're talking English. You're talking Italian. So we went back to school and we tried so hard to understand them, and they just kept bullying us and saying, you're in America now, speak English, you're in America now. And we went home and we were screaming at our parents, you're in America now, speak English, because we only spoke Italian. So little by little, we start learning English because we were in the 1st, 2nd, and my little brother wasn't even in school at the time. But we actually taught our parents to speak English. I did all the writing for my mother. She had a sister named Josephine, Aunt Josie. And Aunt Josie would write Mother in English. Mother could not read English. I had to read it for her, and then I had to write back to Aunt Josie in English so that she could understand. So I was the in-between person. And that's how I got to know Aunt Josie better than any of the other aunts. We could not afford to go down and have vacations in Florida at that time. It was after I was married and had kids that I went down to Florida and start learning about my aunts down there. And my mother had, there was 8 children in that family. I think they had 3 children that died. My brother John and myself and my brother Joe, we were very close all the years of our lives. Brother John was he was a year older than me. You never knew what he was thinking. He never argued. He never said anything. He followed my father's rules. My father couldn't even hit him because he never did anything wrong. He was a perfect child. I come along and I don't like the way my father is treating my mother. She is like a slave. Whatever he said, she had to jump, and I'm not going to be like that. So I am the one that sassed him. I always argued with my dad. I always tried to tell him exactly the way, I felt. And then I had a little brother named Joe. Now, Joe was just 2 years younger than me. He was a free person. He did his thing. He just went around. He didn't listen to anybody. You never knew what he was doing. He could be gone for 2 or 3 days. He'd take his little shoe shine box and go and shine shoes for 5 or 10 cents, and then you wouldn't see him for a day or two. Then father and mother would get on to us because we weren't watching him. We didn't know where he was at. We don't know where he slept. But he was just such a different kid, and we were always covering for him. Oh, he's probably over at so-and-so's house. Oh, yeah, he's probably over, and we had no idea where he was at. And he'd come home happy-go-lucky after he'd be gone a day or two. He was just a happy kid. Now, when my father went to Chicago, it was because his brother Pete was there and was telling him he could get work in Chicago, where in Tampa, Florida, there was only cigar factories. All you worked in was in a cigar factory. And my dad thought, well, he could better all of us by moving to Chicago, which he did, but the only thing was he would go in the morning, and if he found a day job for that day, that's all he got was one day. They were all doing the same. All the immigrants were doing the same thing. They were going out, and wherever they were needed, whether it was for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, that's all they got. And they got their money that day and came home. But little by little, as time went on, we started speaking English, and we actually resented our parents speaking Italian at home, because we had made so much fun of, in grade school. Now, my father, somehow or other, and he was a hard worker. He may have been a lot of other things, but he was a hard worker. He managed to get $400, and in 1932, 33, something like that, he saved $400 to buy a house, a 4-room house at 40th and Normal in Chicago, Illinois. My brothers and I slept in the front bedroom. Mother and Dad slept in the bedroom that was on the kitchen, attached to the kitchen, and there was a bathroom there, and the living room. And I have to say this because people do not understand what was going on in those early years. We were never allowed to do anything in the living room that was strictly for company. We could go through the door, but we couldn't play in there. We couldn't talk in there. We could not do anything in that living room. That was a no-no. But little by little, as my dad would go to work or wherever he found a job, every day when he came home, whatever lumber or wood that he would see laying in the streets, he would pick up and bring to the house and put in the backyard. Now, a lot of this lumber had nails sticking up, and we were kids. The next to the house on one side was what we called a prairie or a vacant lot, but on the other side was an old house that had been either ruined by either fire or just run down. It was all wood and cut glass and that. Believe it or not, I learned to go next door and play with the glass, and that's how I learned how to do my multiplication tables and my adding and my subtraction. I would play with the glass. Never cut my finger. Now, I can't say that about the backyard. There was many times when either I or my brothers would step on one of these nails that my dad had brought home with lumber sticking up the nails, and step in it and get it in our foot. We'd go in the house crying and Mother would get out the Lysol, and there we would soak our feet in Lysol water until it healed. And this was constant. You know, we were always getting nails in our foot because the whole yard was full of rotten wood. But we also needed the wood to start the coal stove in the kitchen. In the kitchen areas where the coal stove was also. And you started it with wood, and then you had to get coal, and he would pick up coal on the way home. And that's how we lived the first part of our lives. So my father decided he would try to build a room on the back of this house. Now, like I say, it was just 4 rooms. So next to the kitchen, he attached all the plumbing from the kitchen into this new room and made a bedroom for the boys in the back. So there was like one long room, and it was just one doorway to the back of this room, and then back to the yard again. So that is how we actually lived until he could afford a house on 59th and Emerald in Chicago. Now, our house at 40th and Normal sat across the street from our house was a factory where they killed animals. I'm going to say cattle and whatever came from the stockyards, which was down the road a piece. We were lucky because on Fridays, people would not buy livers at the store or hearts or parts of the animal that, you know, was the cheapest thing that they could sell. So it was called Ladies' Day, and we were allowed as women. And by this time, I was getting to be 10 or 11. I actually looked 13 or 14 at the time. And Mother and I would go stand in line to just get the liver or the heart or whatever they were giving out at that time. But they couldn't sell things like that at the store. People wouldn't buy them, that had money, that is. So we learned to live on liver and hearts, lungs, anything a part of the hoofs, anything that they couldn't sell at the store. But we were so tickled to get that. So little by little, like I say, my dad built this room on the back, little by little, and then all of a sudden, he got a job. It was a steel mill, and he worked nights, only nights. So we had to be real quiet during the day because he was sleeping. But little by little, he started accumulating a little bit more money. He saved enough money to buy a 2-story house on 59th and Emerald. We moved to the upstairs flat. So I actually got a bedroom by myself, and the brothers got a bedroom by theirself, and Mother and Dad got a bedroom by theirself, and we had a kitchen, a dining room, and a front room. And we were living in hog heaven. We thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world. But it also got us away from the factories that we were around, and I have to say this, I missed it. I missed our little prairie on the side that we used to play, because now we were in a neighborhood, and you had to watch because people were mean. They made fun of you. Our accent was funny. Our living experience was funny. Mother cooked Italian. They didn't cook Italian up there. I never knew what a mashed potato was. I thought a mashed potato was a runny potato that was all watery, because that's all Mother knew to fix. And it went further. In other words, everything we ate had to go for 5 people. If you all knew me before, I love to eat food. I love food. And I found out if I worked in the kitchen, I could get my meal free. That's when I started learning about mashed potatoes and gravy and cream peas and things that we never had at home. We got into high school in December 9th, I believe it was. December 7th was when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And on Monday morning, the principal had everybody in the assembly hall and said that there was a war going on. Now, mind you, I'm 13 when this war was going on, where Pearl Harbor was bombed, but the war in Europe had been going on for 3 or 4 years. You know what I mean? All the boys were they had to get drafted when they were 18, regardless. They were all drafted. They were either sent in the Army, Navy, or Marines, someplace. Well, like I say, whenever Pearl Harbor was born, then it was really strict. I mean, then we were at war. My brother John came home when he was 17. He was in 3rd year of high school, and he wanted my dad to sign the papers so he could go into the Navy with his friends. So he came home and asked my dad to sign the papers. He was only 17. And my dad says, I will not sign the papers. And my brother says, why don't you sign? So that's the only time I ever heard my brother John argue with anybody. And him and my dad had absolutely a fist fight over that. And I was standing there watching this. I was shocked when my brother John, he wouldn't hit my dad back, but he sort of, try to dodge him. And my dad, he finally got so mad, and he finally signed the papers for him to go into the Navy. My brother John told him, he says, I will never come home. And he never came home. When he got out of the service, he didn't come home. He didn't come to Dad's house. And so John married Helen. He got a job as a janitor's helper. He fell in love with Helen, his wife of 10 years. And him and her were married, never had any children. So that's how come all of us girls could get work. In the summertime, there was no men to work. And men were the ones that had these jobs. So the very first year of 1941, I worked at the soda straw factory. In the second year, I got a job at Montgomery Ward's. And Montgomery Ward's was a big thing. It was a catalog place like your Amazon is today. You know what I mean? Everybody ordered through the catalog. You didn't have stores. You had dime stores, 10-cent stores, but you didn't have the big stores in the cities like they are today. Now, when was my 3rd year, and I was going into my 3rd year of high school, I got a job in a factory. And the job was it was a paper factory where they made tablets. And we made them, and I thought, this is a good job. This is a 40-hour-week job. I don't have to go back to school. And so I decided I was not going to go back for my 3rd year of high school. And by the time I start doing this for 3 or 4 weeks, I thought, wait a minute. I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I better go back to school and get a high school education, because at the time nobody could afford college, So I went back to school 6 weeks late, and I went to the principal's office and I said, I'd like to come back to school. I quit school, I want to go. Well, he says, you need to get your curriculum, and you go to each teacher and explain that you were 6 weeks late and you want to make up for the time. And they all agreed. My main subject was home ec. And I worked my fool head off for that teacher. And at the end of the semester when I went, and we used to carry our grades and hand them in, and then she would fill out whether you passed. It was either G, good, excellent, or F, failure, And I went in there and she flunked me. She failed me. All the other teachers passed me. All the things that I took, everybody passed me. She flunked me. And I was furious. And I said to her, you said if I made up, I said, I've stayed at extra classes, I've cleaned the kitchen for you, I've did this and blah, blah, blah. I've really given my little spiel out to her. And she says, you can never make up what you miss. You have to take this class over again. Well, I took that class over again, and she put me through hell. She gave me the dirtiest jobs in there. I was cleaning kitchens and washing dishes and cleaning everything, and I was grumbling all the time I did it, and I finally got through that semester. And I thought, boy, she better not flunk me this time. Boy, I was really mad. The little Italian in me started showing up, I have this Italian. Well, I went in there and she gave me a grade I'd never seen before. It wasn't G, it wasn't E, it was S. And I looked at it and looked at her and I said, what is S? You flunked me again? And she said, no, Mary, S is for superior. You have done such an excellent job making up that. Yeah. Well, I couldn't get mad at her, but I'd never heard of an S before, and I don't think even the principal heard of an S. But she actually made up for the year that I went in there twice. I did that same thing. I was good at it. By the time I got it the second time, I was good. So now I go on. Well, I had started being very friendly with our downstairs renters at that time. And Florence was the mother of these children that I babysat. And she says, you know, my brother is in service and he'd like to get a letter from you. And I said, oh, okay. And I was writing to several of John's, my brother's friends anyway at the time, because everybody was in service. My brother John was in. He quit school as a junior and enlisted because he wanted to be in the Navy. He didn't want to go into the Army. If you volunteered, you could choose where you wanted to go. So I thought, okay, I'll start writing. And his name was Robert J. Roush. That was his name, R-O-U-S-H. And I start writing him. Well, by the time I was graduating from high school, we were getting pretty friendly with the letters, you know, really getting serious. And he asked me if when he got out of service, would I marry him? And I said, sure, you know. I was tickled to get out of my father's domain, so to speak. My father was a strict Italian. You had to go by his rules or no rules. I mean, that was just it. So that's how when he came home, we got married right away. Didn't know each other really, but he was from Frankfort, Indiana. And that's what he said, when we got married, we're going to Frankfort, Indiana, and that's where his father was. And I said, okay. So we went there, and believe it or not, we got a room upstairs, attic, in the same house that his father was renting a room from. It was the most horrible time of my life. I couldn't do anything. I was of no use to anybody. He was going out looking for work, which never happened because you have to go back to the time of 1946. The war was ending. Everybody was getting out of the service. Everybody was looking for jobs. When I got pregnant right away, I was one of those that always was sick all the time. And I said, I'm going home. Now, we're in Frankfort, Indiana. I'm going back to Chicago. At least I can do something there. And so we moved back to Chicago before Jen was born, you know. And she was born 3 weeks early. After we moved back to Chicago, he still couldn't keep a job. He'd go somewhere and he'd be gone, but he never came home with any money. We were living on his take-home pay. As the boys got out of service, they got so much money for being in the service in a lump sum, sort of. That's what we were living on at that time. And because he never had a job, and my father stipulated I got to move. Florence Drake and Joe Drake moved out of the first floor, and my father told me, you can move here, well, but you pay that rent every first of the month or you're out of here. I mean, this is the Italian way. I mean, he was just very frank about it. So I knew I had to have that money. Well, this guy wasn't bringing any money, and I was stuck with a baby. And I finally thought, I got to go get out of here and get a job. That's when I got a job at the Foreign Cafeteria in downtown Chicago. And I don't even know if it's still there now. I've often wondered. But that is when I start working, and that's when I start squeezing money, because I thought, I can't live with this man. All we did was fight and argue. The baby would start screaming. Jen was getting to be a couple years old by then, and she would come and get me by the leg, you know, because we were screaming and fighting each other. And I mean verbally. I don't take crap from anybody. I was the big one of the three boys, and I used to beat the heck out of them. And I thought I could beat the heck out of my husband, but I couldn't. He was stronger than I was. So I would be banged up a little bit. And that's when I started going to the farm, and I got a job, and I started working in the kitchen there, making chicken pot pies. And this little hillbilly kept coming up and talking to me. And why do you put up with that? He'd see I was banged up. I had a big fight before I came to work. You know what I mean? I went to a lawyer. He said that I had to have $75 front, or he wouldn't even talk to me. And so it was, you are making $30 a week, but you're also paying out for gas, and I'm talking about gas in the house, gas, electric, telephone, and the rent. And then if you had enough money, you had a little food. So I'm telling this hillbilly, I said, no, I got to get $20 more. I got $55. I need $20 more before, because he kept telling me, get a divorce. You don't have to put up with this crap. and so he said, I'll loan you the $20. This is Max, who I was married to for 50 years. Okay. So anyway, I couldn't get rid of him. He apparently liked me enough. He'd sneak me food. He'd wait for me after work. He was a morning cook. And he'd wait for me. I'd get off at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. He'd be outside saying, okay, we'll go to your house and we'll fix something for supper. I'll buy the groceries. So he was actually helping me live. And I couldn't get rid of him. I didn't like him. He was a Southerner, another man that would take me away from Chicago, and I wasn't going to have that. No, I've learned my lesson. I'm not leaving Chicago anymore. I've done that with Frankfort, Indiana. I'm not going to do that. And when he asked me to marry him, I did get the divorce by the end of 1949. The divorce was final. And just about that time, my mom and dad decided to move to California. And she said, okay, Mary, I know you're getting a divorce. We'll take Jen with us to California. When you get the divorce, then you come and you can stay there. I'll take care of Jen till then. And he said, he's wanting to go out. And I said, oh, no, now I'm through him. I got the divorce. I got it paid for. You know what I mean? I was ready to dump this hillbilly and go on with my life. Because there was other guys, there was other guys, a little interest. And they keep saying, well, we'd ask you out, Mary, but Max is always around. Max was just there all the time. I couldn't get rid of him. So I had to marry him. I mean, that sounds weird, but that's what happened. I couldn't get rid of him. I thought, hell, if I can't get rid of him, I better marry him. But he did ask to marry. I said, I'm not moving to Arkansas. No, you aren't going to ever get me to Arkansas. Oh, I would never ask you, he said. You see where I live, don't you? I've been here since 1963. Okay, we got married, and as luck would have it, I got pregnant. Way again. Here I go again. But anyhow, I did get Jen back. Okay. But in the divorce settlement, one of the stipulations was that I could not leave the state of Illinois because my husband was supposed to have rights to see Jen. And the judge says, if you're any kind of a mother, you'll have Jen back here. She's to be here 2 months out of the summer for her father to be with her. Well, he never paid but one payment of child support after we got the divorce. Never seen the man again. I never seen him. I didn't want to see him, but I also couldn't leave the state of Illinois. And that was my thing. Boy, whenever Max wanted to move to Arkansas, I can't move there because I have to have Jen here just in case the father wants to see her, But I didn't file for money or anything. I was so glad to get rid of him. And Max just took Jen, there she was, and just carried her around, and she called him Daddy from the time she was a baby, 2 or 3 years old, I believe. And I mean, that's the only daddy she ever knew. She never seen her own father. Whenever Max and I married, I didn't want to work in the same place with him. You know what I mean? You just don't want to do that. So I got a job making pies in a real nice fancy restaurant, but I got pregnant. And there you could not work after you were 6 months pregnant. You had to quit. So I had to quit working, and we were just living on what Max made. And he wasn't making a whole lot because he was just a cook. So he says, if we move to Arkansas, he says, we can make a garden, we can get a cow, we can get our milk, we get some chickens, and we'll get our eggs. And he says, I'll sharecrop a little farm. And he says, at the end of the year, I get half of whatever the farm makes, you know. That's how sharecropping went. The man worked, and the owner bought all the equipment and seed and feed and everything. And then at the end of the year, when they sold their crop, so to speak, their cotton or whatever they were raising, they would share it, have 50-50. So I moved to Arkansas in 1952. And the longer I stayed there, I thought, this is silly. I could be working in Chicago. We could be building and buying a farm. Why sharecrop a farm? He never thought he could get out of it, because this is what his parents did. They sharecropped. The brothers sharecropped. Nobody owned anything. Well, I come along, I want to own something. I said, I'll tell you what we'll do, Max. And I have everything down pat. We'll both work, we'll save our money, we'll buy a farm, we'll build a new house with indoor plumbing and a furnace, because I was out there helping them cut wood for the wood stove. Down there they didn't use coal, they wood. And I says, then I'll move back to Arkansas. So that was our deal. And he said, okay. So we both, Buford come along, we just left all of our furniture there, and he just had to move in. And we just came with our clothes and moved back to Chicago. He went back to the farm cafeteria and got a job like nothing, because he was a good cook, you know, and they wanted a good cook, a dependable cook. I got a job at the bank, the Exchange National Bank in Chicago, and I'll tell you what, I loved that job. I started in the bookkeeping department, and when I seen that computers were starting to come in, I said I want on the floor. I got to be a floater, what they called a floater. I could go in any of the cages, they called them cages, and relieve anybody, or if they didn't show up that day, I'd take their job. And I finally got my own little department in the collection department. And I hated to give that up, but we worked there for 10 years. In the meanwhile, bought a 40-acre farm and paid for $4,000 at the time. Well, then his brother Cecil was living on a big farm, and it was 200 acres, and that guy wanted to sell it for $17,000. So he calls Max up and he says, Max, why don't you buy this farm? And he says, I'll stay here and sharecrop while you save the money to build a new house, because I wanted a new house with running water indoors and an indoor toilet and all the fancy stuff. So we sold the 40-acre farm and put that $4,000 on the 17-acre farm. And then we were supposed to pay $5,000 for the next year to pay off this $17,000 farm. Well, every time we just about get enough money to build the new house, and me and him's working in Chicago all this time, his brother would call up, Max, if we had another 30 cows in the pasture of this guy, we could make money with the calves. We could sell the calves in the fall. So we'll buy there went our money again. We bought the cows. We didn't have them 3 months until they come up diseased. And the government's come in and made you sell all the cows. We had to sell the cows. We didn't even have that stuff paid for yet, because they just gave you so much money for each cow, you know. We had to destroy the cows, so there we were back down to no cows. And so we never went to movies. We never went dancing. We didn't do any. The thing that we actually did, and I noticed down where Max was raised in Arkansas, that's what people did. You went and visited relatives on a Sunday, and they had a big dinner. And we would go to Rockford from Chicago because most of his family went to Rockford to work. And so that was our weekends. If we have one weekend a month or every 2 months, we'd go to Rockford to visit his sister or one of the cousins up there. And that was the way. They would come to Chicago, and they always wanted to go to Brookfield Zoo. We were so tired of taking them to Brookfield Zoo, but everyone that came there wanted to go to the zoo. I don't know why. But that's what we would do. We'd take them to the zoo. Well, we just start building up again to get enough money for this new house that I was going to. I mean, it was always the new house that we were then. We'll get the farm paid for. Okay, then his brother come up. Well, now, Max, if we had a couple of sows, we could sell the pigs, and make money. He was always telling us, he was the one farming everything, okay? Sharecropping, I should say. Max was paying, we were paying for the tractor and all the seed and the fertilizer and, everything that went on. And here we go again. Well, we just about got the money. We got that farm paid for, finally. And I said, okay, now we can start on my house, He come up and he says, you know what? He says, there's a house right there up on the hill. And he said, they just redone the house. It's got indoor plumbing, and it's got running water inside, and it's just all brand new, and it's $17,000. That was a 100-acre farm. We bought the farm. Mind you, we came back here at the beginning of '53, and we moved back in the winter of '63. So it took 10 years to do all this building. So anyway, Max and my brother went down there, made a hallway in there. I mean, they redone everything Mary wanted, Mary was going to get, just to get down to Arkansas. I've been here ever since. I went down there with the idea that we got the house, went to get a job after my 10 years of service at this bank in Chicago, went into the bank. They had 2 banks in Walnut Ridge. And I went in with my resume. President of the bank says, what's this? And I says, well, I'm applying for a job here in the bank. And he says, where are you from? He noticed I didn't have a hillbilly accent, so to speak. I said, well, we just moved here from Chicago. Oh, he says, oh, we only hire our own. And he threw my application in the garbage right in front of me. Went to the other bank, and that guy was a little nicer. He said, well, we'll look it over. I knew there was an opening because one of the girls on the farm told me. Meanwhile, I was talking to everybody. I can't get a job. I can't get a job. Why can't I get a job down here? They didn't hire people that came from another state down there. So I didn't get a job there. So for 2 years, I chopped cotton, hated it. And I was picking, and this man comes down the row of cotton where I was picking, and he said, are you Mary Light? And I says, yeah. He said, well, I'm Pat Jansen. I said, well, hello, Pat. I didn't know what the hell was this about, Yeah, I mean, I'm picking cotton, which I hate to do, And he says, I own the Clover Bend Gin. I said, well, that's nice. He says, my wife works for me. I said, oh, that's nice. I didn't know what was coming up. And he says, she went and got pregnant. And he says, she's working for me this year. But he says, starting next year, which is the beginning of 1966, would you come and work in the cotton gin for me? How did he even know I was a book? Because he asked me, well, you're a bookkeeper, aren't you? I says, yeah, I'm a bookkeeper. How did he even know? Well, talk. Everybody talks, So I got my job at the gin, and I'm there 10 years, and I loved it. He was the best boss. I never seen him in the office. He just said, if any farmer gives you any problem when they come across with their cotton, you come and get me all. It was such a nice job, but it was only $1 an hour at that time. $1 an hour. I was so tickled to get the $1 an hour. And then I could collect, whenever cotton crops were in, I could collect unemployment. Boy, that was $30 a week. Boy, I didn't even have to work for that. I was in hog heaven. And then again, one day, I answered the phone. He says, "Are you Mary Light?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "I'm Wendell Kimbrough, and I'm the postmaster at Alicia." I says, "Oh, how nice." He says, "We're giving a postal test. Why don't you take the test?" I said, "Why would I take the test?" He says, "Because I need a clerk, and I have to hire somebody that takes the test, in order to hire him." How he got my name, I'll never know. He was the postmaster at Alicia. That was our postal route. It was Route 1 Alicia. And I went and took, and I thought, I'm 50 years old. I'll never pass that test. It's a memory test. I said, why would I take it? I'm perfectly satisfied where I'm at. I'm at home within 2 miles from home. The school was right there. I could keep an eye on the kids. You know what I mean? You're right there. He said, take the test, Mary. If he called you, there's a reason. Okay, but I'll never pass that test. I'm 50 years old. I never seen it. There must have been 150 people taking that test that day. And I just prayed I passed it because talk, if I flunked it, everybody would say, oh, she flunked the test. Small communities, they all talk. I passed it with a 78 grade. 70 was the passing. I was, oh, hallelujah. When I got that grade at least I passed the test. I don't give a damn whether I get that job or not. I wasn't looking for a job, but this guy was intent on me getting this job. He had to hire a girl that was 22. She got 87, I believe, on the test. But anyway, he called me up. He apologized. He says, Mary, I'm sorry, I got to hire her. She made a higher grade than you. That's fine. But he says, I'll tell you what. He says, Hoyt Wilmoth at Swifton is looking for a clerk. Can I send your grade down there? So I go down there, and there's this guy, and he's talking to me, and I'm saying, fine. He's trying to explain everything in the office. I said, fine. I go home. I said, boy, that's over with. I don't have to do that. I only did it because this man was nice enough to do this for me. And I go back to work, not thinking a thing. 2 weeks later, the rural carrier comes up to the house. He says, hey, Miss Light, he says, Hoyt Wilmoth wants to know why you didn't go back. He hired you 2 weeks ago. I said, what? Yeah, he says, he wants you to come and get the application. You got to take a physical, in order to pass, because they insurance was free. The government paid your insurance, your health insurance. I thought, I'll never pass that physical. I weigh 233 pounds. They never even looked at that thing. They just, you're hired. That was it. And I got hired as a clerk in Swifton. 4 hours a week, $5.25 an hour. I was in hog heaven and insurance for just 4 hours. I got hired in August of 76. In October, UPS went on strike, and they were doing any parcels. And so everybody that was a clerk in these small offices was asked to go in and work 6 hours every night for 5 days a week, and then the 4 hours would give us our 40 hours a week. I had to give up my job at the gin to work there. And we worked there, and they thought whenever the UPS went back to work that we wouldn't have to work those hours anymore. But gee, 5.25, 40 hours a week, I was living in gravy, And so here they didn't lay me off. I worked two years as a Swifton clerk for 4 hours, and 36 hours at Jonesboro at nights as an extra. Wendell Kimbrough called me and said he had been promoted to Pocahontas as the postmaster of Pocahontas, and his job would be open. Why didn't I apply for it? And so I applied for it, with several other people who applied. And I luckily won out and got to be postmaster. And I was postmaster there for 6 years. In 1984, the postmaster at Walnut Ridge retired. And again, Mr. Kimbrough called me and said, why don't you apply for the postmaster's job at Walnut Ridge? And I got that job in 1984. And I worked there until the last day of 1989 when I was past 62 and I was going to retire. I had 1 year to move to Walnut Ridge when I accepted that position. And Max was in the process of selling the farm, which he sold to his nephew, Jackie Light. I was in the process of trying to tell them what I wanted in a house. Bill Ferris drew the plans for my house. And I had Max's oldest nephew, Jerry Lynn, and his wife, Connie, had been close to us. They were just like our kids. They were always at our house. She helped organize the house for me because I was working and had started my position at Walnut Ridge, and it was a big post office. I was over 14 people, and I had to make sure them people were there every day to work. And one of them was my son-in-law, Gerald Milligan. He was one of my employees. I couldn't even take time to hunt for a lot. I was so busy with the new job, and it was such a big job from what my little post office was. With all these people you had to take care of, make sure they were working every day. And Max was busy trying to sell the farm, so he didn't. So my dad bought this lot and paid for it. It cost us $8,200 at the time. This is 1984. We moved in 85, yeah. And so I had to pay him back. If you knew my dad, you know when he paid for something, you better have the money to pay him back. I retired because my husband and I had worked so hard to accumulate what we did, and he wanted us to be together and do things together. And that's what we got to travel a lot and babysit a lot and really enjoyed our life together. We bought a lot at Spring River. We spent a lot of time up there, but that's because he could go out every morning and fish. And that's what we did for 10 years because he died in the January 7th of 2000. He was just sick all the time. He couldn't, actually he was diabetic, but he wouldn't pay attention to his diabetic. His whole family had diabetes. All of his siblings, it seemed like they ended up with diabetes, and there was 12 of those kids. Went in and they said, well, the only thing we could do is operate, and if we can catch that cancer before it gets to the main artery, then he'll live. But otherwise, we can't give you any hope. So he went in and had that operation. And when they came back out, this was in 1998, he said, we couldn't get it. We'll give him 2 years to live. And he suffered for 2 years with it. Max died of pancreatic cancer. And I couldn't hardly get over his death. So I started doing some walking around the house. I'd go down one block and the other just to occupy my time and try to forget all the suffering he went through before he passed away. And then one day I met one of the ladies that used to live right down the old gravel road from me from school. And she was walking around the Christ building. And she says, you know, Mary, why don't we go up to the schoolhouse right there? We don't have to worry about rain or cold weather or anything. We can walk every day and walk in the gym. So we got together, we started walking around the gym. And it was really nice, and we kept smelling food and people out in the foyer there. And I said to her, I said, Evelyn, and her name was Evelyn Whitmar, I said, Evelyn, why don't you go in there and find out what's going on in there? Oh, sure, she says, you get me to do that, huh? I said, well, find out what happened. Maybe we can get a free meal. Well, as it is, it was of course, the beginning of my activities with the Senior Citizens Center. And they fed you lunch every day. And then they did activities. They'd be walking the halls like we were doing. We got to know a lot of people that we didn't know. And it really became our daily routine to go in there every day. And I stayed there until I moved here to College Square, 2021. Mm-hmm. After Max passed away, because Max would not go to a lot of places. After Max passed away, my daughter Susan started scheduling me in all these trips. We went to Canada twice, we went to Europe 3 times, we went to the Vatican, and our last trip overseas was to Sicily, Italy, to actually meet some of my father's cousins, because his sisters that was left died several years ago. And it just satisfied me to know that I actually seen where my dad was raised. One day, Jen just come in and said she was getting married to this man. And I said, "What man?" She says, "Oh, this real nice guy that I met." And I said, "But when did you decide to get married?" And she says, "Oh, we've been talking about it for a while." And I didn't even really realize that she had met somebody. But his name was Gerald Milligan. He's a Vietnam veteran. And they were going to get married, and he didn't want a big to-do, because coming from Vietnam, all they wanted to do was get married, you know. In 1969, my daughter Jen married Gerald Milligan. They had 3 children, Kenny Ray, Jimmy Dale, and Melinda. And my daughter Susan went to college, UCA in Conway. And Susan, after she got to Conway, met this fella called Bill Ferris, who I did not know, of course. He was driving her home from college, and I was working at the gym at the time, and he got out of the car, and I thought it was a hippie. He had a beard, he had a mustache, he had sloppy clothes on, no socks. He looked like an absolute hippie, and here I am in this nice gin with all these God-fearing people, farmers, and I went out there and I said, "Get him out of here, go home and hide him." Susan married Bill Ferris from Conway. They had 4 children, Trey Ferris, Leah being the next one, and Lauren and Whitney. Whenever the kids would come to our house, we always cooked. And let me say that Max was actually a better cook than I was in some things. And he was always in the kitchen with me. He done all the chopping and all the dirty work. I did all the cleaning and the cooking, but he done all, and everybody can remember this. When the kids came at Thanksgiving, a lot of times we would make homemade raviolis, because they like to pinch the raviolis and seal them. And so we made homemade raviolis. A lot of the times that they come, he would make the jelly and peanut butter French toast. And I must say, the Lights family, there were so many of them, and every one of them I enjoyed. Just meeting them and cooking for them. They could come anytime to my house, and that's what they remember, is coming to the house and eating something different. They didn't just have a bowl of beans and fried potatoes, you know. So all those children are our cousins, and every year they get together. They're very close, and they get together and they have like a family reunion, and that's when they take this picture every year, and they all do it according to their ages. And I have one cousin that's older than me, but I'm the next one in line. John and Helen never had any children, and they got a divorce. And of course, John was out looking for a nice, good-looking woman, and he found one in Bonnie. and they had Bonnie Sue. So they have one child, Bonnie Sue, who is a daddy's girl. She takes care of her mother, but she's a daddy's girl. Now, Joe and Betty had 3 adopted children, and they took care of all of them, set them up, sent them to college if they wanted to go to college, because Linda came down here and went to college. Linda was the oldest, Mary Alice the second one, and Johnny was the baby. And they're still living. Linda's in Arkansas, Mary's in Arizona, and John is in Texas. Yeah, now that I've moved to Conway, Susan is my go-between. I cannot see very clearly. I cannot see little things. And so I have to have Susan take care of everything, and she takes me to the doctors. She takes me on vacations. She makes me go places that I really don't really want to go, but I go because she makes me go. She becomes the mother, and I become the child. Isn't that good? And here I am in this lovely place where I don't have to do a darn thing, just pay my rent every month, and Susan does all my work. As I look back on my life as it was, I do believe that the Lord had everything planned just the way it happened. I did not know how it was going to end. I did not know from one step to the other, but somehow or other, everything fell into place to make my life as wonderful as it has been, even with the hard times and the easy times.